Hey guys, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is actually going to be about the 4.5 million defender. And the reason why I'm doing this video is because I actually think it's a very important position in FPL that a lot of people have been neglecting in their drafts. What I've seen so far in terms of a lot of submitted drafts is a very thin bench. So that bench usually comprises of a 4.5 million forward or a midfielder and then two 4.0 defenders. I think that that's a little bit too weak and inflexible. What we don't want to be relying upon is consistently having, let's say, auto subs, or where we have an injured player. Let's say we have Chilwell or James and they get injured, or even Stones, for example, if he's benched on a random game. You want the player that's actually coming off your bench to be a quality player from a quality defense. And with the exception to maybe Burnley, where I think they could generally be a decent Premier League defense, we don't have much expectations for championship promoted teams. The only two teams in the last 7 odd years who were actually a good promoted defense were Brentford and Wolves, and I don't have the same expectations, unfortunately, for Burnley, just because their fixtures are really poor to start with. So that's why I think a 4.5 defender is so useful. Let's actually go about ranking the 4.5 million defenders, and I'll also explain the pros and cons because I don't actually think it's as simple as 1, 2, 3. But the first defender that I'll actually say was actually the best is going to be Rico Henry or Ethan Pinnock. Let's start with Rico Henry. Rico Henry, of course, is a fullback. He's actually had 2 assists in the preseason so far. What I do like about him as an option, of course, is that he's actually extremely fast. So, of course, there is a tactical advantage of having him. He's very good at being able to sort of make that overlapping run, and then to look for a cutback when he actually strides into the box. The big thing about Rico Henry, of course, is that he does play quite a defensive role. He's usually used as a lockdown defender, and his 1v1 defending is particularly crucial to the way Brentford play. Ethan Pinnock actually has really good expected goal involvement, and that's simply because he actually had a fantastic tap-in opportunity at some point in the season that has really inflated his expected goals per 90, in my personal opinion. So I think that his ability as a set-piece threat is a little bit overrated. So that actually makes me think that Rico Henry is probably the option that I'd like to go with. I personally like to have a fullback in my team. But why do you want to have a Brentford defender? The key thing here, in my opinion, is that a Brentford defender can actually provide you with a top 6 defense, which is what they were last season. Even if you go back a year previous to that, they were still a top 8 defense. So that's the quality defense, at least a top 8, top half defense, and a top half defense that actually has an exquisite run of games. If you look at game weeks 1 to 7, for example, or even 1 to 9 for Brentford, the fixture run is particularly good. There's no reason for you to transfer them out. They cover some great gaps. So let's say you have Gabriel in your team, or you have Zinchenko, or even Saliba. You might not really want to be playing them versus United in game week 4. Who do Brentford have in game week 4? They've got a team like Bournemouth at home. So that's a perfect opportunity to find a player at a 4.5 million price point that can actually completely cover a really tough fixture for one of your starting defenders. And this is what someone like Henry could do. At the same time, if you have some unexpected injury, he can be called upon. And of course, the Brentford defense is something that we can, let's say, have good expectations over compared to, let's say, a Sheffield United defense or a Luton defense. As far as the Knicks 4.5 defender, I would actually say that Colwill from Chelsea is my second best defender. And the reason why that is simply because Chelsea have a lot of injuries. It doesn't seem like Thiago Silva is going to be particularly used in Pochettino's system. He hasn't actually featured too much in the preseason at all, and Colwill has actually played a full game, and I think he had a knock heading towards the second game, which is why he missed out on it. But Colwill is a left center back, so there's actually less depth there because Badiashile is actually out injured until August 26th, and of course we know that there's going to be a slow process to reintegrate him back into the team. So we can have some guarantees, in my opinion, at the beginning of FPL, that Colwill will probably start for Chelsea. And of course, if he has a good run of games, there's no real reason to drop him. And we do particularly rate him, of course, based on his performances in Brighton in the previous year, where you can clearly see that his expected goals per 90 is quite high. So that means that he's a clear set-piece threat. And also, of course, his performances in the Euro U21 tournament where England were able to win. So congrats to them and Colwill, of course. As far as Chelsea, of course, they have a great run of fixtures after game weeks 1 and 2. So the idea really is any sort of fixture after, let's say, game weeks 1 and 2, where you need a 12th man, I think Colwill is actually perfect to also plug that gap, very much like how Rico Henry has a great run of fixtures with Brentford. The third defender is actually going to be Sven Botman. And Sven Botman, of course, represents a fantastic pick. And you might even find it weird that he's the third pick when Newcastle were actually the second best defense last season. And I would agree. I mean, ultimately, The reality is Newcastle's fixtures are incredibly tough to begin with, but of course at the same time the 4.5 million defender is a price point and a position as well where you don't really want to be rotating too much. So there is a genuine reason to actually keep a defender and not think about transferring him out at the 4.5 position if he's your 12th man. So after game week 4, at Game Week 5 Plus, Newcastle have a great run of games. So if you actually are able to hold out on Botman and not necessarily need to use him between Game Weeks 1 to 4, you've got a perfect pick there who's going to be the best defender at Game Week 5 Plus onward. What I would also say at this point is that some of the great option that you can think about if you want to be very differential is to go for Tarkowski. He also has a decent run of games with this Everton team. I don't particularly rate Everton highly. Ultimately, even under Dijk, they weren't really improving much as a defense. They haven't made many defensive improvements. They have lost Mina as well, Yerry Mina, that is, from Colombia. And of course, you're looking at this player like Branthwaite coming from PSV to probably improve their defense, but we also have to wait and see whether Everton can actually improve. Ultimately, as I said, the underlying data, both under Lampard and under Dijk, wasn't particularly good, and we know that this Everton team hasn't strengthened too much from the defensive positions and even in the midfield. So that's a point of concern, but of course you could argue even that Doucouré was a huge improvement to the team. Now, with Tarkowski, I do think he's the 4th best pick, particularly from a Game Week 1 perspective, so there's no real reason to consider him. What are some players that are actually ones to watch? Ones to watch players, in my opinion, would start with Destiny Udogie from Spurs. He's actually someone who's actually featured in one of the preseason friendlies as a starter, and I do think that he has a higher likelihood of actually nailing down that left back position than someone like Reguilon or even Perisic, arguably, who actually might actually be playing a winger role for the Spurs team. As far as Udogie, he has really good, healthy attacking numbers. Of course, he's a fullback. We don't have usually access to fullbacks at 4.5, particularly for a defense that was actually top 5 in XGC last season. Now, Spurs completely underperformed defense, and they actually conceded much more goals than what they should have expectedly conceded. And we know under Ange Postecoglou that he will be a very attacking-based manager. They haven't actually kept a clean sheet in the preseason so far. Don't really expect too many clean sheets as well this season, at least early doors. But the key thing, of course, is how are the fullbacks utilized? And of course, the attacking edge is what makes someone like Destiny quite worth it if he's nailed. But there is absolutely no reason why you should be picking him for Game Week 1. We need to see that he actually gets nailed into the team before we even consider him as a pick. As far as other 4.5 million options to look at, I think it's actually the entirety of this Aston Villa defense. A lot of people have been talking about starting with Matty Cash, starting with Mings, or starting with Pau Torres. I personally don't like it. I did mention, however, at the start of the video that I do like the idea of maybe rotating, let's say, between Aston Villa and Newcastle, because if you have 2 rotating 4.5 defenders, it could work out quite well. However, I still think that Aston Villa's defenders, if you're just looking at them in isolation, only really start to turn good fixture-wise for game weeks 5 or 7 onwards. So that's actually quite a long time for us to actually assess how much is Pau Torres going to play. Is Mings going to be nailed? Is Konsa going to play at right back sometimes, which is actually what we saw last night in the preseason game? Is Cash going to be nailed when the game weeks actually start? So that's something that we need to look at. Who's actually going to lose out the most amount of minutes? Is it Konsa? Is it Mings? Or is it even Cash? I do think Pau Torres might be the most nailed player, so he would be the one that I would opt for, just because if you actually look at the fullback, for example, with someone like Matty Cash, his expected numbers are very, very poor. And the reason why that is because the left wing back, arguably in the structure, even though it's just a back 4, is so high. If you look at Moreno's advanced positions, if you look at Luca Dean's positions, who actually, he plays a little bit more of a traditional fullback role, but if you look at Moreno specifically, he's basically positioned like Marcelo, like a left winger. So that actually completely impacts the role of the right back, which is why a lot of people, were already theorizing about Konsa playing at right back even before the preseason game last night. So that's why I think Matty Cash isn't a particularly appealing option. But all of this gives us the time to assess whether these players are good or not. And of course, this is how we should look at the 4.5 million defenders. One player that I think we should avoid is unfortunately Anderson. And ultimately, I think we should also avoid the Crystal Palace team. They have actually been a top 4 defense in terms of quality in the last 2 years. You can see that from the XGC. But I do think Crystal Palace have a particularly poor run of fixtures. So when you compare it to, let's say, a team like Everton, which were a much worse defense and a bottom half defense, the difference is clearly the fixtures. Another thing too is that there are no particular defenders from this Crystal Palace team that are any good at set pieces, or even from the attacking point of view in terms of fullbacks like a Mitchell. So that's my main concern with Crystal Palace as well. So that's why I would probably avoid them. And let me know what you guys think about the video. Of course, we have someone like Igor as well, who's probably one to look at from Brighton. I would not say at this moment in time that he's going to be absolutely nailed in this team. Of course, he's a new signing, and Brighton did spend quite a bit of money to actually get him from Fiorentina, but I would wait and see. And especially if we own Estupinian or maybe even steal I'm not sure if I'd love to start the season with a double up with Brighton. I just love Estupiñán that much more for that 0.5 million in the bank. And that's pretty much my thoughts on the 4.5 million defenders. As far as the 4.0, of course, you can have one of them on the bench, but I would still much rather prefer a 4.5 defender. At the moment in time, 4.0 defenders to look at are really just Bayer from Burnley or Kabore from Luton Town. So thank you guys so much for watching, and let me know what your thoughts are. See you guys in the next video.